All right, let's just jump right in. We're going to explore a pretty shocking idea from Dr. Gabor Mate. It's about this powerful and often totally invisible link between our physical health and the emotional lives we're all taught to just push down. What if a lot of chronic illnesses are just our body's final, desperate attempt to say no when our minds feel like they can't? So, to get started, I want to ask you a couple of questions, and as I do, just try to be really honest with yourself and think about your own life. You know what I'm talking about, right? Maybe it's a headache that just will not quit, or a backache that has no clear physical cause. That feeling of being tired all the time, even when all the medical tests come back saying, nope, you're fine. Does any of that sound familiar? Okay, now for a totally different kind of question. But think about it. That extra project at work you really didn't have the bandwidth for, a favor for a friend you just didn't have time for, or maybe just going along with something to keep the peace. When was the last time you just overrode your own gut instinct? And this is really the core of what we're talking about today. What if that physical symptom and that suppressed no are actually two sides of the very same coin? What if your body is trying to tell you something that your mind has learned over years to just ignore? Let's look at some real human stories that start to reveal this connection. And these aren't just random anecdotes. According to Dr. Mate, they're actually clues to a widespread, hidden epidemic. So first up, we have Mary. She was a really kind, gentle woman in her 40s, and for her, it all started with a small cut on her finger, a tiny puncture wound that, for months, just wouldn't heal. This eventually led to a pretty devastating diagnosis. Scleroderma. It's a disease where the body's own immune system literally attacks and hardens its own tissues. But here's the thing that no medical chart ever showed. No doctor ever asked about Mary's life. Turns out she'd been abused, she was abandoned, and she'd spent her entire childhood just terrified. And she never told a single soul. So as an adult, she was compulsively beautiful, completely incapable of saying no, and always putting the needs of her husband and her children way before her own, even as her body was failing her. And this brings us to the really crucial point. Dr. Mate suggests this powerful connection was Mary's body, by hardening and rejecting its own tissues, finally saying the no that she never felt she could. It's a really chilling thought, isn't it? Her body was basically rejecting a lifetime of dutifulness that she couldn't escape from. And look, Mary wasn't just some isolated case. Mate saw this pattern again and again and again. He saw it in Natalie, whose multiple sclerosis would flare up as she was caring for an ungrateful husband. And he saw it in Lois, who endured an abusive partner way up in the Arctic, just desperate for the approval she never got from her mother. The pattern? It's always the same. You suppress your own needs to please other people. Now, you might be thinking, okay, those are pretty extreme examples, but what's really fascinating is the science behind how this can play out in all of us, every single day, whenever we just pretend that we're fine. So according to Mate, the most damaging kind of stress isn't the big stuff like a divorce or losing your job. No, it's the chronic, daily, internally generated stress of being the person who always says yes, the good employee, the perfect parent, the reliable friend. Yeah, on the outside you look super responsible, but inside, your stress hormones are constantly elevated, and your immune system is being suppressed, even if you don't consciously feel stressed out at all. Okay, let's get into a major study that puts some hard numbers on this idea. So, researchers in the former Yugoslavia followed almost 1,400 people for a whole decade. They looked at everything you can imagine, smoking, diet, genetics, you name it, and they wanted to find the single biggest predictor of who would end up dying from cancer. The answer is, well, it's stunning. It wasn't smoking. The single greatest risk factor was a personality trait they called rationality and anti-emotionality. In other words, the repression of anger. People who scored highest on this particular trait had a 40 times higher risk of cancer. 40 times. That number is it's staggering. And this part just brilliantly illustrates the whole point. The study found something even more specific about lung cancer. In their group, get this, smokers had 0 incidence of lung cancer unless they also had high scores for repressing their emotions. This suggests that the emotional repression basically created the biological vulnerability that then allowed the carcinogens from smoking to do their damage. It's incredible. So this all raises a really critical question. Why? I mean, why do some of us become so unable to express our own needs or our anger? The answer, Mate argues, starts way before adulthood. It starts in childhood. We really need to rethink what we mean by trauma. It's not just the obvious stuff, like overt abuse or neglect. Trauma is also what happens when a child's emotional needs just aren't met. When a parent is there physically, but emotionally they're checked out, too stressed, too distracted, too worried to really see and validate their own child. That kid learns a really powerful unconscious lesson. My needs don't matter. So the crucial takeaway here is this. What we think of as our personality, being a people pleaser, being stoic, never getting angry, that isn't necessarily who we are. It's actually the set of adaptive behaviors we learned as children to survive in our family environment and to make sure we got love and attachment. And those exact same survival strategies, they can become incredibly harmful in adulthood. Now, I know this might all feel a little bleak, but here's the hopeful part. If these patterns are learned, it means they can be unlearned. We can actually learn how to start listening to what our bodies have been trying to tell us all along. And the first step, pretty counterintuitively, is what Mate calls the power of negative thinking. Now, this is not about being pessimistic. It's about dropping the pretense that everything is okay. It's about having the courage to look at what isn't working, to actually feel the anger or the sadness you've been pushing down for years, and to ask yourself, where in my life am I saying yes when I really mean no? So Mate provides this kind of roadmap for the process, which he calls the 7 A's of healing. Let's just spend a moment with these. It all starts with acceptance, just acknowledging your reality as it truly is without judgment. Then you move to awareness, learning to listen to your body's signals again. Next up is anger, and seeing it not as something bad, but as a healthy energy for setting boundaries. From there, you build autonomy, developing an internal sense of control. This allows for healthy attachment, so you can connect deeply with others while still being true to yourself. Then comes assertion, declaring to the world that you exist and your needs matter. And finally, affirmation, finding a connection to something bigger than yourself. You see how together these things form a journey back to who you really are. Ultimately, this completely reframes how we look at illness. It stops being just an enemy that we have to defeat. It becomes a messenger. A symptom is a wake-up call, and it's prompting us to ask, what is this telling me about my life, about my past, and about the changes I need to make for my future? And so we end right back where we started, with a question for you. In the tension in your shoulders, in the knot in your stomach, in that exhaustion you just can't seem to shake, your body is speaking. The only question left is, are you willing to finally listen?